Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Jane Van Dis. I'm one of the co-founders of OBGYNs for Sustainable Future, and I am excited to have with me today Ronda Carnegie. And Ronda, I did not know when we picked this new meeting time that it was a big day for Project Dandelion. I'm surprised you even have time to meet with us just because so much seems to be going on. But obviously, I'm sure you planned this all days and weeks and months ago. So congratulations on the social media launch that I've been seeing across LinkedIn and Twitter today. Anyway, for those in the audience, I wanted to interview Rhonda Carnegie. Some of you, all of you probably are familiar with her work at the Female Quotient. I know a lot of us are retweeting, reposting, sharing their reels on Instagram. They have brought so much valuable information about how women can succeed, become advocates for themselves, champion the work of their fellow sisters in the work environment. So that was the first clue that or the first time that I had come across Rhonda's bio. But then I saw her work with Project Dandelion, and obviously this is something that's near and dear to our heart here at OBGYNs for Sustainable Future, because we're trying to imagine how we, who graduate 85% women into our specialty, can become better leaders in terms of addressing both the climate crisis for ourselves, but also for our patients, as they're going to be turning to us with pertinent questions about safety, about mitigation, in addition to the fossil fuel crisis as it relates to phthalates and preterm birth rates and things like that. So who better to interview than someone who has expertise in finding our voice and using our voice loudly to advocate for a safe environment for ourselves, our planet, and our patients. So Rhonda is the Chief Operating Officer at the Female Quotient. She's had a long career in communications, and she is a co-founder at Project Dandelion. And for those of you who haven't looked at their website, I encourage you to do so. I won't belabor it any longer because I really want to get started talking with Rhonda. So welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. Such an
Yeah.
and actually it's an honor on this really important day. And we'll talk about that, about Project Dandelion and why today and why that. And thank you for talking about the female. My role at the Female Quotient is the Chief Innovation Officer. And really the Female Quotient is an equation. What can we do to really change the equation for women? What can we do to close the gaps? And many of that is about bringing visibility to the incredible expertise that women have and their lived experience in the workplace. And I only say that, Jane, because in the conversations that you and I have, we've talked a lot about women's lived experience. And I agree, yes, the Female Quotient has really hit a chord on a sentiment of feeling that people are having. And we hope to do the same also with climate, with Project Dandelion.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about how you became introduced to Project Dandelion and the types of skill set that you hope to bring to the project.
Thank you. Well, back in 2017, I had just left TED. I spent 8 years building the TED Talk brand and have been absolutely fascinated by the power of ideas to impact change. And I went to the Rockefeller Foundation for a fellowship to really explore this idea. Actually, I was really interested in how women network together in order to create grassroots change. And coming out of that work was born Connected Women Leaders, which is exactly that, takes a look at that. And we decided as a think tank group to take a look at global health, security, women and economic development, and climate justice. And with the support of Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, who was among our group, we talked about the fact that climate is the intersectional issue of our time, and we should really focus on climate. And when we took a look at the landscape of what was going on out there, we really just felt that we needed to create a unified symbol that all women can come around, and that was the dandelion. And so there are a group of us. There's myself, there's Pat Mitchell, who comes from a feminist background, who also created TED Women with me,
Yeah.
and also another woman by the name of Hafsat Abiola, who is out of Nigeria, who grew up as a democracy activist, and then Mary Robinson, as well as some Indigenous sisters who are working on this. So it is a collective, and I am really delighted to be one of the co-founders of this initiative.
What do you think
Wow.
is one of the most challenging aspects of for people to see how gender and climate intersect and why women and girls are more likely to be affected both due to temperature, resources, violence? What do you think some of the barriers are for people to understand where women and girls are in this crisis?
Yeah, I think I think it is a great question. Oftentimes women are focused on as the outcome of this. So women are the most impacted by climate. We see that around the world. And we want to shift and change that narrative to really talking about women being the solvers.
That's right.
The women down in Africa who are coming up with agricultural solutions, or the women who are really focused on global health. But what we do know is that we have to make that connection, because typically the barriers are that people are very single issued focused. We're very crisis focused. So we go to the crisis of the moment.
Yeah.
So is the girls' education crisis, um, girls, girls and childhood marriage crisis. So we go to the crisis of that moment instead of really understanding this layered approach to solving sort of these problems. And that is exactly why we're so pleased to activate the campaign that we're talking about, that we are releasing today, that says everything, these issues are climate issues. And then we are releasing 7 op-ed essays today that make the connection between those issues and climate. So I think it's an awareness. It's, it's making the case that is really important. And we move from a crisis to really focusing on the future we want to create for the next generation.
Yeah. One one of the themes that I hear from a lot of OBGYNs, I also help to admin a group of 6,500 women OBGYNs. One of my co-admins is here. Hi, Julie. And I feel like those of us who are older are often asked, for some in the younger generation, how do I speak up? What do I do if after I speak up and try to lead on a topic, I'm immediately shut down? Are there key speaking or communication strategies that you would share with our group about how women maybe who haven't been in a leadership position but want to find their voice, what are some ways, besides maybe watching some of your TED Talks, what are some ways that women can activate that voice in themselves?
No, it's really interesting. One of the things we talk about at the Female Quotient is 2 things. One, this imposter syndrome, which is this idea that we think we listen to this voice in our head that is the one that tells us, don't speak up, or, so we always say, like, shut up that voice in your head and move forward with thinking about all those ideas. But oftentimes with women, we don't actually we don't own the room with our expertise. And that's one of the things that we really want to focus on with women, is that when we first started this element with Project Dandelion, the women in the room said, I am an expert in global health, but I'm not an expert in climate. And so there was a sense of women that unless you're really an expert, you don't
Yeah.
really want to speak about it. And so one of the things we want to convince women is that everyone is a climate expert because of the lived experience that we are all going through right now. So we say, make it personal, make it personal. What is it that you are personally facing that you can bring up and talk about with a lived experience, and then lend to it your expertise and perspective. And so being able to really, break through. I mean, we women are getting much better at breaking through, but oftentimes, even when we created 10 Women, one of the reasons why we created 10 Women is that women tended to suggest somebody else to talk about something rather than to have them talk about something. So
They thought that there was someone who was more of an expert out there.
yes, yes, or that there is a man, or they're too busy. There's too many competing things that they need to focus on. So they might suggest a man. And then I other think just in our relationship with men and women coming together on issues, we often talk about the role of men as allies. And again, we really have to switch that narrative. It really has to be we for we. It's like, what are we doing in order to create change and to not make it such a gender issue in the way that we're talking about it. So we say at Connected Women Leaders, our theory of change is that women lead and action follows. And so one, what are we doing to help women be better leaders and be able to talk about what's going on in climate and move from fear to hope, and then also to be able to utilize their positions of power to help create change.
Yeah. But bringing up male allies, I'm curious, do you think that in order for Project Dandelion to succeed, that it will need male allyship, or that it will need men saying, yeah, you guys, we all need to pay attention to this, as opposed to subjugating it to a women and girls issue like that? We don't want the latter to happen.
No, we don't. I mean, even on our efforts with Project Dandelion, it's women design and women led. It's not women only. So we never think of it as women only. We know
Right.
that we have to bring everyone in the room in order to do that. But we also imagine if every woman around the world decided that they wanted to make climate their issue, and we took the power to do that, that we could change the narrative and change the conversation. So how do we use this unified symbol to all women be able to talk about the impact of climate on their work and to make it a priority and begin to move things forward in that way? So it's
Yeah.
really about women as the messengers and the solvers instead of women being the victims.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the questions that I had for you was about whether Project Dandelion was just focused on sort of climate as it relates to increased global temperature. But then I saw from the campaign today that obviously it's not just about that. Can you speak a little bit to the way in which Project Dandelion hopes to address biodiversity loss, which can affect the ability to grow food? One of my passions, which is all of the plastics and then all of the phthalates, which are affecting the reproductive healthcare system. Can you speak a little bit about some of the other ways other than just temperature that Project Dandelion is interested in?
Yeah, well, if we just look at temperature itself, people are that's what they
That's
see,
what they think
right?
about. Yeah.
That is what they see. But as the campaign evolves, it will be really exciting to really like just even what you can do with food and agriculture or the decisions that you make. Like we will be able to give women a chance to, one, to become advocates, two, to change the language, and three, to start moving forward with solutions. And just even what you're saying about biodiversity, or imagining the packaging that we buy or the decisions that we make, that these will all speak to opportunities. And even in the business sector, I was on I was on a plane the other day. I was traveling somewhere and the airline had like in the magazine, meet our chief trash officer. And they were talking about how trash is the future, could be the future for airline, for fuels and this. And so we're starting to see that people are really starting to focus on these solutions that are not just good for society, but good for business, good for, really a green transition. So it's all like sort of laddering up to what does a green transition begin to look like.
I'm curious what you think or have you in your experience been able to sort of typify or quantify if males have a difficulty being allies in the workplace or in projects like this, how can we help break down those barriers for those men who we want to be our partners, but for whom that's maybe not a natural place. They're used to being the leader or they're used to having the podium. What are some ways that you've seen women be successful, obviously not in a negative way, but in a positive way to get them to step back and listen?
Well, and I do think the pandemic really helped us with that because it was a very even playing field where
You mean
men,
on Zoom here?
yeah, exactly, but also men were in the home, like all of a sudden, like, they started seeing, a shift of responsibility. Well, I think what we have to do is we have to really ask men the same questions women get asked all the time, and we do
That's
that.
right.
Like, when was the last time a man was asked, like, who's taking care of your kids,
How do
or
you balance it
how do
all?
you do it all? How do you balance it all? It's like, I was at a conference the other day and it was with investors, with women investors. I was listening to the questions that the judges were asking. And it's like, I'm just so aware of questions that only women get, it's that men don't get. So we have to normalize the conversation and begin to have it be a conversation that is not gender specific. And in the case of like, I can't tell you how I love all the time when I'm traveling on planes and I see dads with babies in the carriers and they're doing the work or they're involved. I think that we are seeing this shift of shared responsibility in that way. I do think there's a lot of things about how women have that extra shift at home, and we need to, continue to talk about that. And there's some economic, pieces of that. But I just think in general, yeah, changing the way in which we're talking about these issues and to whom, I think will help to support that.
I love that. I love that. Um, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges in getting the public to care about climate action?
Well, I think for the most part, it's been individualized. People have been told, use bamboo straws. It's like it's so individualized. And I think part of that is that fossil fuel has really controlled that narrative. They're spending tons of money telling us what they're doing, and it's actually really slowing us down because it's really just great marketing. And so really that is what we're up against. We're really up against that narrative. And so we have to really shift and be able to tell people that putting pressure on the system to create change is really important. At the same time, there are amazing, in terms of business, there are amazing amount of people who are really focused on climate solutions. I hear about them every day.
Do
So
you? Yeah.
marketplace is investing in this future. It's just a matter of how fast that we can get there. So we really believe that we are on the cusp of a climate safe world, but we're just not moving fast enough to really cut carbon emissions. And even if all the pledges from the governments and the corporations and the investments are fully implemented, we're not on course to move fast enough. So that is why we have to really focus on this gap of what we can do to really accelerate the change. And what that means is that we know that there's 2 billion people who are sitting on the sidelines who are alarmed because of climate and they see what's going on, but they're actually don't know what to do. So that's really what we want to do with Project Dandelion, is to really take a look at this and begin to communicate some of the things that people can do and how they can participate in a number of different ways.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about that. What would you want someone, other than signing up and watching the video and reading the editorials that you published today, what kinds of action items are you interested in encouraging people to do?
Yeah, well, right now, the first part of our campaign was really a bat signal out to all women to sign up. So it's like, the dandelion pins and being a part of it and saying, I am a dandelion. That is like, we're mobilizing and we're uniting. And then as we launch the next part of our campaign, we will have an app, we'll be in the headlines, and we'll be able to put pressure on the system to create the change. So we have 7 demands that we're focused on. One of them is the phase out of we think is really important. We also think that there needs to be work that's being done in financing, how climate is being financing and where that money is going. A lot of the work in climate right now is in loss and damage. We want to
Yeah.
move that from this crisis mindset away from loss and damage into actually having communities know what they need to do in order to protect themselves from climate. And we want to focus on the green, like I said, really this clean transition. What does this clean transition begin to look like? How are people thinking about what their usage is? And again, how they're making purchases and what they're doing that will, again, it's the power of the money to really move things forward. So it's voice and sort of action.
Yeah. So two things come to mind. Number one, I was curious if you saw what the president of Saudi Aramco, in addition to the other CEOs in the room, said today at a meeting they were at, saying that net zero by 2050 is not going to happen, and we're not going to dial back fossil fuels. Did you happen to see that headline today?
Well, I think that has been, again, that's why they're trying to control the narrative. Is that they're trying to manage expectations, and that's managing public sentiment around that. And we have to say, like, that's not okay.
That's
It's
not okay.
that's not okay, because we know that once we get over 1.5 Celsius, which has been what's been written in all the language, then that is the point where we're going to really start seeing an acceleration of the change. So and by the way, the fossil fuel companies have done an incredible job, like through intermediaries getting in the rooms so that they can really control this narrative. And that's why we have to be more clever. And that's why we have to really think about what we're doing, impacting culture and bringing it to the forefront, and not moving back to what we're saying, not making you feel that it's individualized, or being resilient is an individual thing, but that when we aggregate all women together to say, we want to see this change, especially for our children, then that becomes the magnifying, multiplying voice of change. And so we can't sit back and accept 2050. We actually can't even accept 2030. So we can't let the fossil fuel companies control the narrative.
I see a lot of debate online about the idea that, and this, we have these discussions among our field as well, in obstetrics and gynecology. And that is that it's not up to the individual, that it's really up to the politicians and the corporations. But yet we buy all the stuff that they make. So for instance, I'll give you a little anecdotal story. So I'm a teacher. I teach residents, right? And they're learning. And oftentimes we'll have a cesarean section and the mom will want her tubes gone, sterilization. We used to tie the tubes. Now we just remove them because it decreases her risk for ovarian cancer. So we take the whole tube out. Now, I've only been here at the University of Rochester for 2.5 years, so I wasn't familiar with this, and some of the others on the call may laugh, but I always took tubes out by clamping and cutting and tying, fundamentals of surgery. And so I came to the University of Rochester, and they're using these plastic devices. Now, plastic devices are amazing in medicine. They allow us to do all sorts of fantastic things in shorter amounts of time and with great efficacy. But really, the tube is sitting there right in front of you. You might shave off a couple of minutes by using this plastic device. And so I've been telling my residents that I want them to do this traditional way. And, I get a lot of, and so I think there's, in some ways, and whether it's the purchase of those cucumbers that are wrapped in plastic, or so many different choices that we make in any given day as to whether to go the easy route and purchase something, or to say, you know what, I'm going to be conscious about this decision. And I'm going to do something that does not support the fossil fuel and plastic industry. And so I'm curious. So I feel like when people ask me, is it individual or is it corporation and government? I say it's both. We can't demand all of these things and then expect someone else to do the work for us of decreasing. So in this case, the alternative is suture and your hands. But what do you say when people ask you, is it the individual, is it the corporation, or is it both?
I think it's such a good question. Again, I think the question is, what's the catalyst for change? And I just think back, you go to Rwanda today and you cannot bring a plastic bag into Rwanda. Just cannot. So, when you go into Rwanda, you got to figure out what you're going to do that's not a plastic bag. Or you think about all the regulation that says in a store you have to bring in your own bag. We're not going to do it. And in some states, they allow you still to do it, but the habit is there, even though it's not. It's like there was an overall catalyst for change. And I think that oftentimes we look at just public safety in general. When you look at what was going on with seatbelts, the automotive companies did not want you to have seatbelts. That was like a huge problem.
Yeah.
And now you get in the car and what does the Uber driver tell you? I cannot go until you put on your seatbelt. Or in the front of the car now there's a beeps if you're not putting on your seatbelt. And so that is like this moment that we need, as well as, like you're saying, like to have both a catalyst to really understand that climate safety is public safety in many ways. And so really understanding what is the role of the individual and the larger ecosystem. And I think your point is really a good one. And so we have to be aware of where that's going and what does that look like today. Like just even in just infrastructure problems. You're reading in the New York Times that Paris is holding the Olympics and for air conditioning systems, right? So people are it's going to be the highest heat ever this summer. And then we're going to have the Olympics there. And like, they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. So I think in a way, going back to your earlier notion, in some ways, temperature will drive that public safety change.
Yeah.
To figure out what they're doing, and then it will move its way into, like you're saying, into other areas of opportunities where there's incentives. What is the incentive for the change? And that's really what we got to focus on, is really the incentives.
Yeah. And I feel like you, more than most people, are aware of the savviness with which the big oil has known that there might be an electrification coming, and that they've invested, and they started these investments 30 years ago in plastics, because what, 10 to 12% of all global oil goes into plastics. And so, recognizing that Coke and Pepsi, who I saw yesterday in a graph, were some of the largest plastic producers, in part because we drink bottled water now, right? We don't know a world where we used to drink from the tap. And that plastic around that water was by design. It's a marketing.
Yeah, but you do see today, like you just go into airports, how many people do you see standing up with their own containers filling
Oh,
up the
yeah, that's true. That's true.
So, that is what, we're looking for, that behavioral change, but it has to have a system for you to go to be able to think that through. I was on a conversation earlier and I was so glad that the woman mentioned this to me. She said, I know you're talking about the fossil fuel companies, but just in agriculture alone, like the dung from cows and the emissions that they have, just, Ireland is doing some amazing work about how they're feeding their cows differently, that is reducing emissions, and that meat, if you're a media, that meat tastes better. So, it is, again, like seeing those catalytic changes and seeing that that the opportunity, we just have to speed them up, is what we
Yeah,
really
we
have to do.
do. We
Yeah.
do. And I saw that there was a professor, I forget his last name, and he called out a recent paper put out by the IPCC for the fact that while they said that populations should move to more plant-based protein, there has not been a huge call out of industrial animal agriculture, which, as you know, is responsible for maybe up to 15% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And that big ag also has a narrative about the fact that we're not giving up our meat, we're not giving up our dairy, despite such a huge component of greenhouse gas emissions. And so you realize that lots of people have lots of things to say, and some people don't want us to talk about, eating more lentils.
Yeah, no, I think it's the same thing. It goes back again to, if you look at every advocacy campaign for change, smoking, seatbelts, like all of these things, what was the, incentive? And it is always big corporates that, by the way, they have people who are thinking about what this shift is going to look like. They just know, but they want to be able to milk it for as long as they can. But yes, they want to control the narrative. They have the money to do it. And so that's why we have to imagine a future we want to live in. And that's why the whole idea, like you're saying, of greenwashing or ag washing or all of these things that are going on, that we have to really push through. And I believe that if we can solve this, the best of times are ahead of us. We're not
Yeah.
focused on loss and damage, and as you had said to me earlier, like we have to solve this in our lifetime if we can.
Yeah, no, we can't pass this on. So you've got some OBGYNs here, and more will be watching this later. What advice would you give to us, or experiences that you've had with your OBGYN? What would you want your OBGYN to know about the climate crisis and Project Dandelion?
Well, I do think, one of the things that we know that, many women are trying to decide whether they're even going to have a child in light of everything that's going on. And so really positively imagining that we can solve this. I mean, one of the things that we're just hearing about mothers and just young people. Somebody gave me a really interesting, was sharing with me the other day just about the grief that young people are feeling around this. And I imagine that as healthcare providers in this space, you are trying to understand the mindset of the people that, again, to calm them, to really understand what's going on. But really to be able to understand that there is a sense of grief around this that people are processing through, and by the nature of being able to talk about it, that they can move from fear to hope. And I would say that that is what Project Dandelion to do, is really to move the narrative away from fear and to hope, and to understand to really engage with people and understand what are the positive things they're doing. What do they imagine for their children? But the point that I was going to make is that some child asked a parent, like, what does it mean? What I hear about acid rain, what does that mean? And that was like a really tough conversation to have about, as you're learning the terms or trying to understand your future. So again, really just focusing on being a part of the very positive future, that where we can really move this forward is sort of what I'm about.
Yeah. And I will not I will not speak about the fact that there are some very, very strong right-wing pro-natalist positions here in the US that have obviously captured our Supreme Court, have taken away women's right to choose, are doing crazy things like what happened in Alabama. Women's reproductive rights, my Twitter says reproductive justice is climate justice. While women who choose to have children deserve to have a future for themselves and their children that addresses this crisis, those that do not want to have children should not be forced into birth, which is what is happening in our nation. So I know a lot of people on this call and those that listen later will say that's actually something that we OBGYNs, and Julie's been working hard on this, are doing actively in their state legislatures, testifying, you know, putting themselves on the line, talking about a subject that before Roe fell, some OBGYNs just kind of ignored, but we can't ignore that anymore, because we absolutely cannot force women to give birth into a climate crisis that they don't want. It's never okay to force women to be pregnant when they don't want to. So anyway, that's something that I know I think about a lot, and I'm sure some of the others in the group do as well, because we can't, the two are so closely aligned. I want to ask.
I just want to thank you for bringing that up, because
Oh, good.
that is a perfect example of what we say reproductive rights is a climate issue. Like, that is just and I'm so, you articulated it so beautifully about really, even if we're getting people out to vote and to be a part of the process, will help us to be able to have a voice. And as you suggested with Julie, to be able to get involved in your local community to really pave the way. So thank you for bringing
Oh,
that
yeah.
up.
Yeah, of course. It hopefully goes without saying for 99% of us. I was wondering if you, last question, could say someone that you admire in this space that we could read or follow, someone who's your shero, as it were.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I mean, I have all sorts of different books, but one of them that just think is
Oh,
so
yeah.
great is Catherine Wilkinson, All We Can Save. She wrote so beautifully written about a number of different stories, as well as poetry and others about this time and this moment in climate, and then ends the book with some real action. And Catherine is one of our dandelions,
Oh, yeah.
and is really working along with us to advocate for this. And I feel like her words are well said. So I would say, if you haven't read All We Can Save, I encourage you to read that. Jane, do you have a book that you just think is a great one?
Oh, I've got so many, and I've been reading. I'm really trying to understand the intersection of the patriarchy, pronatalism, and reproductive rights. And I'm actually taking a class in it right now. So
Fun.
I've been on medical leave for 2.5 weeks. So I've read like 10 books in 2.5 weeks. So there's too many.
So
But I'm actually thinking
if
I
you
might write a book.
but if you well, certainly you definitely have a perspective. So what's been your takeaway from the book, from these individuals who are giving their perspective on the subject?
Yeah. So my takeaway has been that, interestingly enough, Ezra Klein did a podcast yesterday on birth rates. And, I saw an article about 10 days ago about the South Korean birth rate and the fact that it's going down. And the statistics and the people interviewed for the article were sort of like, when we are children and when we're teenagers, we are pushed to have careers, and the government wants us to be successful, and but then at some point the government wants us to have babies, but because they live in a patriarchy, we all do. What happens to their career? It kind of falls off. There's the maternity tax, and even though they probably have, or I know they have better paid leave than we do here in the US, a lot of South Korean women are like, I'm just not interested. Like, I was acculturated to do great things and to be smart and to be successful. And I see women who are having families and they're trying to balance it, and I see them suffering. And so, South Korea's birth rate it's like 1.3 or something. It's pretty low. And so I've been thinking about the fact that it's really hard to address issues around the messages that were given about whether or not to have children in the setting of a patriarchy. Like, it would be so much better if we could dismantle the patriarchy, because I feel like then the questions would be more pure, and our answers, would be maybe easier. So I feel like as a woman, you're trying to address multiple threads, multiple threats at any one given time. And I think women do an incredible job of that balance. Having said that, I do think that some in the younger generation are looking at it and thinking, I'm really not interested in working that hard. I don't want to work full time at work and then another job at home. And, why should they? But I guess what the questions that I have are also around whether or not is it fair to tell women that having a child is a hopeful act, which I truly believe that it is, when potentially they haven't been given all the information that they need to make that decision. And it's funny, I did a podcast with a woman a couple months ago, and she said the title of my book should be Informed Consent, because that's kind of how I'm thinking about it, is that in order for women to birth in a climate crisis, they should really be given as much information as possible to make a decision as to whether or not they want to bring a child into this crisis. I think the hope argument is great, but like, the hope's not going to feed you when the crops fail. And so, I've also been looking at ecological overshoot, and that's a math problem. I just read a book last night about an interpretation of how Malthus was used in the 1800s, and why obviously his argument was wrong, but why we actually need we need different questions when we're thinking about population and resources. And there are some hard finite ends in terms of how much pollution our bodies can take, how much CO2 the air can take, how much food we're going to have available in 5, 10, and 50 years. So I think those questions are really, really hard, and I'm trying to figure them all out.
Well, I think just starting out by asking the questions, I think, is so powerful and so wonderful that you've been doing the deep reading to get the perspective to understand what questions that we should be asking. I mean, I just think you make such powerful points about informed consent, about just ability to consume, like you said, the pollution, to being healthy and being able to live longer lives. And I'm so glad that you're doing that work, and so look forward to following that along. I think Project Dandelion is in service to all of this thinking and to really understand what the issues are to create the change. And so, and to figure out how to navigate through it, because as you're saying, it's so complex. How do we decode the complexity of it in order to help people understand what a path forward could be for themselves and their communities?
That's right. That's right. But I do think women are the way forward. I do think that a lot of systems we recognize we're running up against walls have not worked. And in order to make it to the other side of the wall, we might need different types of communication, different types of communities, different types of leadership. And that's where I really was looking forward to hearing your voice about that.
Well, I'm an advocate for rewriting the rules and breaking barriers and doing all that. I mean, I do think that, the many things that we do were created for men and by men. And so we really can't accept status quo for the way it is. We need to, as you said, ask the right questions and to come up with the right way forward that imagines the world as it is designed today, not as it was designed previously.
That's right. That's right.
But
Well,
that's just closing. That's why I say, when women lead for exactly just the brilliance, Jane, that you talked about in terms of the thoughtfulness to which you are approaching this topic.
oh, thanks, Rhonda. Well, thank you everyone for joining. And I know we've gone over time. Thank you so much for staying a little longer, Rhonda. I really appreciate it. Everyone, please sign up and we'll be looking forward to more elements of the campaign. You'll see me promoting it on social. And Rhonda, if Project Dandelion ever needs an OBGYN, you know where to find me.
Well, we will, and you're officially a dandelion. So,
All
and
right, good.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.